I want to talk about Pokemon Advanced. It's interesting when people talk about what they consider to be the best Pokemon anime to ever exist. Some people will say X and Y because of Serena, because of, I don't know, Ash Greninja or Ash being the most mature or whatever. Some people will say Pokemon Sun and Moon because of the fact that the setting changed and the overall vibe, is what made it the best. Me personally, I always really liked Pokemon Advanced. That I would say for me is the best Pokemon season, and a couple of reasons why I would say that is first and foremost, Pokemon Advanced Generation had the best Pokemon design for Ash. I loved his outfit in the Advanced Generation more so than any other Pokemon season anime ever. I just loved it. It just, just really cool stuff. I think that where I was in my life when I would watch the Pokemon Advanced anime is also part of it. Like, me personally, I was a longtime fan. I watched Pokemon from the beginning when it first came to America in 1998, and I basically was, an on and off fan. I saw the entire original Kanto first season of Pokemon. I saw Orange Island. I watched a good portion of Johto. I kind of started to lose interest in Johto for Digimon because Johto had a lot of filler, and I found myself kind of tuning in and out of it after a certain point, and I sort of decided to go with Digimon because Digimon back then had a better story. This was like in the 90s or early 2000s. Pokemon Advanced came at a very interesting time in my life because to me what Pokemon Advance did that was interesting besides, having the best character design for Ash, it was also an attempt for Pokemon anime to be more like the actual video games. Like, for example, this was the first season of Pokemon where Ash had to actually help his Pokemon learn new moves. Like, he had to go through these little training regimens to, for example, to help Pikachu learn how to do Iron Tail or Trico to learn how to do Bullet Seed. To me, there was something that was very unique about how Pokemon would transition to trying to make his Ash's Pokemon learn moves through a certain kind of training, and this would obviously create the foundation for later episodes and later seasons where Ash would do more of this. Like you have the Counter Shield in Diamond and Pearl, and you have a lot of other examples in later generations. But Pokemon Advance was the first season of Pokemon that I felt was trying to be more like the games and trying to implement more realistic strategies and realistic ways to learn new moves and learn new attacks. And I really love this dynamic, Pikachu with Iron Tail, Trico with Bullet Seed, Swellow with Aerial Ace. So that's part of it. The other thing that I loved about Advance was Ash's Tailo and Swellow. I loved the never giving up spirit that his Tailo would show. Like if you saw the episode where Ash was catching it, he went through a war trying to get this Tailo. This thing was surviving electric attacks from Pikachu like it was no one's business. Like, it was insane how Pikachu would just go to war with Tailo when Ash was attempting to catch it. It was very reminiscent to when Ash was trying to capture, or when he was battling Spearow in the very first episode of Pokemon. And I don't know, and I just love Talos tenacity, and I love the journey of what Ash went through with Talo and Swellow, it evolving, the training of which it learned how to do Aerial Ace. I actually think that whenever Ash would go through these little types of training regimens, I think because there was so much of this in the advanced generation, it's one of the reasons why I think I enjoyed it so much. Like, I just think, to me, there was more effort and more energy that was placed in Ash connecting with this Pokemon because he had to teach them how to do these moves. And I will admit that while I am a Pokemon fan, while I have jumped in and out of later generations, I didn't really spend as much time in Pokemon after Pokemon Advance because I was sort of getting tired of the Pokemon formula. So I would imagine that there was probably a good portion of this that happened in Diamond and Pearl as well, but I wasn't as interested in Diamond and Pearl because I kind of lost interest in Pokemon by the time it got to the fourth generation because I just felt like they were just repeating too much of the same, things that they had done in previous generations of Pokemon. Because by this time I had watched Pokemon from '98, and when Pokemon, Diamond and Pearl became a thing, this was around 2010. So that's like more than 10 years of watching the same thing in both the games and the anime. So at this time, I was bored of it. So I can't really appreciate if Pokemon, did the same thing after Advance. But for me, it was a breath of fresh air that Advance took. So many different approaches, and this is why I feel much more connected to Ash's Pokemon team in the Advanced generation compared to, I think, maybe even previous generations and even after. So this is part of it. So Ash's Talo, his character design, the fact that he would force his Pokemon to learn moves, in this kind of way, the fact that the anime would feel more like the games, relying a bit more on strategy was great. I loved Ash's rivalry with Morrison, both that guy both being good friends, being hot-headed and sort of having to go up against each other, and Ash having to give him a pep talk. I just loved their competitive spirit of trying to outdo each other leading up to their battle. It felt like a real buddy buddy friendship. They were so similar and so headstrong, and they just felt like real good friends by the time the two of them had to actually battle each other. And to me, it was a really fun battle. I mean, it was Ash would win, and you kind of felt like the Morrison guy would kind of mess up a lot, but I still love the build up that led up to this battle, and it was just a great buddy friendship that would, and the two having to fight. So this was another aspect of the Advanced generation that made it one of my favorites. One of the other things about it that I loved about Advanced Generation had to do with May. Now, Advanced Generation left this melancholy feeling within me because when Misty left the original Pokemon anime, I was very depressed and very sad. Misty was one of my favorite characters, and I had followed her with Ash since Pokemon had begun. So this was like multiple years. I was so invested in Ash and Misty being a couple. I would even live vicariously through Ash and would imagine Misty being my girlfriend. And when she left, it kind of felt the same as a breakup. It felt as though she was out of my life and she was gone, and I literally felt depressed and lonely whenever I would watch the Pokemon anime because she was gone. And the episode that she left, it was just so sad. It was when Misty had that realization that she wouldn't be traveling with Ash anymore because she got her bike back, and how he was so clueless and nonchalant about the whole thing, and seeing her upset and depressed, and just seeing her gone, seeing her and Brock leave just left this really depressing feeling. I mean, Brock would ultimately come back, and I think it kind of softened the burden a little bit, and I think it made me cling to the possibility of Misty coming back later. That's why May coming into the anime was kind of a big deal, because even though it was obvious that she was meant to be a sort of replacement for Misty, and also adding a different layer and dynamic to Pokemon, because Ash would become a mentor to May after becoming a trainer who basically had lots of experiences with battling in leagues, winning championships at this point. So obviously he had now assumed the role of being a qualified enough trainer to be a mentor to May, and that dynamic was very interesting and different to see. And plus, May gave me a lot of hope. It was to say, even though she was a replacement for Misty, I was always hopeful that the two would get together, like Ash and May. Like back in the day, when we didn't know that they weren't going to get together, and before Drew would come into the picture and kind of, would ruin everything, in my opinion, because I never really shipped Drew with May. I always had this hope that May and Ash would become a thing, and then I would live vicariously through Ash, and May would become my girlfriend. I was young at the time. I was not even a teenager when all this stuff was happening, so forgive me. But that was one of the things I liked about Advanced Generation, was that I just had hope that May would be, a character that would replace Misty in a really, interesting way. Ultimately, I was kind of disappointed, but I did like May. I think May brought a lot of fun moments with the anime. She had some interesting interactions with Ash, some shippy type moments, some arguments, some funny scenes, which I'll probably play. So May was a lot of fun. Contests were an interesting thing to introduce into the anime. It was also nice seeing Ash be a mentor to her. It was nice seeing, May as a beginner trainer learning the ropes. Seeing her eventual evolution, her Torchic ultimately becoming a Blaziken, her Beautifly, learning contest strategy. It was really cool watching her growth overall. I didn't love everything about what happened with May, but it was still interesting overall to see her. And I think for the most part, that was what I loved the most about Pokemon Advance. I didn't really care about Max. I didn't care. But yeah, that's basically it.